Greetings, students, and welcome to this episode of The Professor Travel. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the website, the vlog, and the podcast that you come to in order to learn more about different travel destinations. This is where we come as a community in order to talk about them, to discuss them more. Hopefully, this will inspire you to travel more and ultimately to enjoy life more. Now, you can reach me on a variety of different social media platforms, including but not limited to my website, which is at theprofessortravel.com. On YouTube, on Facebook, and now on TikTok, you can find me there at The Professor Travel. If you're an Instagrammer, you can find me there at the_professor_travel. If you're on Twitter, you can find me there at theprofessortr1. And then finally, if you're a blogger, you can find me there at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I'm welcoming back a emeritus professor at this point, Morissa Pawl-Frederico. How are you doing?
Um, uh, Hanging in there with this. What are we going on month 9?
Oh my gosh, the coronavirus is kicking us all. It's just terrible. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to interview with us today. I know my students are always appreciative of getting your insight on different places that you've been to. So again, thanks so much for your time on this.
Absolutely.
Before we get started on anything, can you share a little bit about just a quick little preview about what this picture is about?
Sure. Well, today's subject, which you haven't mentioned yet, is Cuba.
Yeah.
And Cuba is known for its old cars, which dates back to they date back primarily to the 1950s or earlier, as the car that we're sitting in does. And it primarily because once the embargoes started, they couldn't get anything new. So this is an old 1920s car, and we actually hired it as a cab, as you do when you're in Cuba. And I am there with my partner who's standing up, and then two very good friends that I've made over the years, Elise and Chris. Elise in the green shirt and Chris with the hat. And the four of us decided to go to Cuba. So we're in Havana, and we see this car. We decide to hire it, and then we just said, okay, that's it, picture time, group picture time, because we weren't really taking a lot of pictures of ourselves. So we're just all hanging out of the car and just having a great time.
It seems like it would be a lot of fun. And it just looks like one of those kind of shows. I cannot believe you're in a car that's almost 100 years old. That's mind blowing to me. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it's insane.
Considering how fast we go through cars these days, people are lucky these days to have a car for 10 years at this
Oh,
point.
and as I love cars, and my father is a car buff. He can look at a car from a distance and tell you what year it was made and the model. So for him, I brought all these pictures and showed him all these pictures, and he was just in heaven, going, "Oh, that's a whatchamacallit from 1958."
That's awesome. So
With
as you made mention,
a
yeah,
swing
no,
and
it's got all this. Yeah, exactly. No, it just looks like a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
as you made mention, our conversation today is going to revolve around the beautiful country of Cuba. Now, talk to me a little bit about why you decided to go to Cuba. What was the draw to want to go there?
Well, this was, the Obama years, where Obama had started opening up visitors to Cuba. Um, Still limited, but in airlines were now flying to Cuba. So now, the next presidency came in
Mhm.
and started to shut that all down. And we decided it's now or never,
Yeah.
quite possibly. So that was the primary impetus, because it's a place I'd always wanted to go. I dreamt of going there, and I felt personally that it was a narrow window of opportunity.
I understand now very much so because I've wanted to go to Cuba for many years. This is a specific reason why I think it's important to take those political
Mhm.
considerations into factors. Excuse me. And I know hopefully with the new administration there might be some
It should change.
opportunity to come up again. So
It will.
now, how
And
long? Did it,
I think when we went, it was really we went nonstop from Los Angeles
hmm,
on Alaska Airlines, and we'll get to that. And it was really one of the last flights, um, into Cuba. It just a month later, and it was all shut down. In fact, it was advised that they were going to shut it down, and they were allowing people through the end of the month that we had planned, and then it was being shut down.
Insane. So how long in advance did you need to plan for this kind of a trip in advance?
Well, this one we planned much longer in advance than normal. Um, Completely unaware of what was going to happen. But we planned this one probably, I'm going to say about 8 months in advance.
Okay. And what was the visa situation like? Because I know you need very specific situational allowances to get into Cuba.
Well, you do technically at the time, President Obama had loosened the restrictions substantially, and you could go for tourism, um, sort of.
Yeah.
It was fuzzy. Let's just say it was fuzzy. Um, what saved us, because then this was, then 2017, and things had changed. And what saved us is me being a college professor. I was able to tick the box that this was an educational venture for myself and my companions. Although tourism was still, like I said, technically allowed through the end of that month of October.
Okay.
in
Perfect.
2017.
Were there any type of special preparations that you needed to do? Any like travel medications or special circumstances that you need to prepare for ahead of time?
No, none at all. Cuba has first-rate medical, so we did have medical insurance, of course, but they have first-rate medical care, so that part was not a concern at all.
Okay.
In fact,
Uh,
if I had gotten sick, that's exactly where I would have wanted to be taken care of.
it looks like the weather there was beautiful, but what did you do in order to pre-pack for this?
Shorts.
Shorts.
Shorts. It's hot. It's you're talking about, the Caribbean. So it's hot, and we were there during October, the middle of October. So the weather was not as bad, but there were some days that were sweltering in some of the places that we went. But otherwise, it's really casual. Don't dress don't dress up. They don't have that kind of money, the people of Cuba. So you don't want to appear ostentatious. You just want to be normal, just casual clothes. Whatever you wear here, you can wear there.
Okay. I have a quick question for you. Maybe you have insight on this. Maybe you don't. I don't know. I'll ask though. Um, Now, I know there are some areas of Cuba that the U.S. houses its prisoners and stuff like that. Guantanamo specifically is the
Right.
one that comes to mind. I'm kind of curious with the relationship that Cuba and the U.S. have. It's like, how are we able to do that? Do you know kind of why that is?
Yeah, I do. Guantanamo Bay is on the island of Cuba. Um, Even though the relationship is so strained and there is no real official relationship, we're able to do that because they're not going to say no. And it's an unfortunate situation. I mean, where you're talking about a military giant like the United States, we don't even really have any relationship with the country, and yet we are, using part of their land. And what are they going to do? They're not going to say get out or we'll, throw a rock at you. It's really kind of a, David and Goliath situation
Yeah,
more than anything.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, now you may mention that you left from LAX.
Mhm.
Did you just get dropped off over there, or how long were you in Cuba for?
I want to say we were there for about 10 days.
So did you actually park at LAX, or did you get like a shuttle or something like that in order
No,
to?
we flew down from Portland and met our friends in LAX.
Oh, got it. Okay, that
Yeah,
makes
we,
sense then.
we flew down, and then Chris flew in from Utah,
Okay.
and Elise lives in Los Angeles still. So we all met at LAX to get ready for the flight, to go on the flight.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. And which airline did you decide? It was Alaska, you said?
Alaska, my favorite airline.
Well, you get a lot of frequent flyer perks on there, it sounds like.
I am the boss on Alaska.
Very nice. And did you just do economy? Did you upgrade? How did you go there? Do you remember?
We did. I didn't have status at the time. No, we all did economy.
Okay, perfect. And it was nonstop from Los Angeles to Havana. Is that correct?
Nonstop.
Okay, perfect. And so there's no pre-vacation destination. When you got there, you get out of the airport. What's your first impression?
Wow. Like stepping back into the 1950s.
It's
Exactly what I had hoped for.
it's a time capsule, pretty much.
Time capsule.
That
Completely.
sounds amazing.
It is. And I don't mean it in a bad way or a glorifying way. It is what it is. Stepping back into the 1950s because that's really technologically where they've been left. And it just, we landed, we went through, well, what we did, and I don't know that it's really necessary to do this, but we spent a little bit extra and we paid for what's called a concierge service, which I at the time they were offering. And you pay a little bit extra. Somebody meets you as you come off the airplane. They take you to a room, not a bad room. It's a room with several different kinds of rum waiting for you.
Nice.
For you to taste. Yeah. And you sit and relax, and they take care of getting your bags, and then they walk you through customs, which, by the way, was super easy.
Really?
Even if you didn't have the service, not difficult. You have the right visas. It's, in fact, you have to, of course, get the visas ahead of time, which is a bit of a process. It's not difficult, though. Again, it can be done online, at least at the time, and things I'm sure will return to that. So not difficult, could have done it on our own. This just made it so nice because we sat and had rum while someone else took care of it. I think it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, or no, it was about probably 7 o'clock in the morning. Having rum, didn't care.
Yeah, I was like, you're on vacation. Does it really matter? Like, it's 5 o'clock in the world somewhere. So
You're in Cuba. Come on,
enjoy the happy hour. Exactly.
happy hour.
So what was your itinerary going to look like while you were there? What were your days? Actually, were you staying in Havana, or were you going to be going somewhere else
No,
directly
we
from the
we
airport?
stayed in Havana at the beginning and the end.
Okay.
We did all Airbnbs,
Okay.
which was, well, I don't know. I can't remember if it was actual Airbnb or the Cuban version, but
Okay.
I think it was the Cuban version. But either way, completely reliable, delightful. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Okay.
And you're staying in people's houses.
Okay.
The plan was a little bit more of a push than I typically would do. I'm more an immersive person, but we were with one of our friends, Elise, who wanted to pack as many places in as possible in the time we were there. So fine, we accommodate that.
Okay.
So we started off in Havana for a couple of days, 1 or 2 days, I think. Then we went off to Cienfuegos,
Okay.
from Cienfuegos to Trinidad, from
Okay.
Trinidad to Santa Clara, and then Santa Clara back to Havana. So it was kind of a circle of the western side of Cuba as opposed to going further east. We
And
did
as
not.
we, and as a quick note for my students that are out there, when we say Trinidad, we're talking about the city of Trinidad in the country of Cuba, not the country of Trinidad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now, how were the accommodations met in terms of, did you have someone from your party who spoke fluent Spanish? Did you need to speak Spanish at all? And in order to be able to get the keys, in order to make sure that the transaction worked effectively, what was the process like in order to be able to get geared up and ready for your accommodations?
Well, I speak enough what I call tourist Spanish.
Okay.
I, yeah, I used to speak a lot more Spanish, but I can get by in
Okay.
a Spanish speaking country for the most part. So we had planned, of course, in advance through emails, all of these places and booking and prepaying and what have you, and or partially paying. And when we got there, it was very easy. One thing I will say about the Cuban people is, you're not really going to run into a lot of scams or scam artists. And that's partially because of their culture. It's just not really done. The Cuban people are absolutely phenomenal. I just love them. And we got there, took a taxi right to the place that we needed to go. The woman was waiting for us, handed us the keys, showed us everything. There was a housekeeper and cook every day, that came, and she spent time in the place. And it was a three bedroom apartment up on the 11th floor, overlooking the ocean.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think we paid maybe $50 a night.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
That
and
is extremely comfortable.
funny story, just the year before, a cousin of mine had stayed at the same place.
What is that? How you did? Is that how you got the recommendation for it, or it was just random?
Random. And I was talking to, it's a cousin I've never met outside of Facebook. We were talking about it. She said, "Oh, I was in Cuba with some friends of mine last year, and we stayed at this place." I'm like, "Wait, what?" Yes. So it was really funny and coincidental. We just happened to stay in the same apartment.
I want to jump over to some pictures that you provided for this presentation that you wanted to share some stories about. Talk to me a little bit about these two pictures on this specific slide that you have here.
Sure. This is Havana. The photograph on the left is just a street in Havana. It's not an unusual street. It's a typical street,
That's
with the
beautiful, though.
cobblestones and those beautiful houses. There's a fair amount of decay, which you can't see in the photograph on purpose, but there is a fair amount of decay because there isn't money to fix these places up. But these places were built in a time when Havana was the destination, especially for Americans, with casinos and resorts and what have you. So these buildings were really from that time period. They're still solid. Don't get me wrong. Sorry, I lost my voice there. They're still solid, but there's you can tell they need some upkeep, some refurbishment. But this is a typical Havana street with the cobblestones and the balconies and just beautiful and delightful.
Now, the next picture that's on here is talking about something about genocide and history.
Yeah. This, well, now Cuba doesn't have advertisements. They don't have billboards with advertisements because it's a communist country.
Yeah.
This is a billboard, which it's the bloque, which means the blockade or the block. And what it means there is, for those of your viewers that don't speak Spanish, is the genocide, the largest genocide in history, is the economic blockade. That is what they're trying to say, and with the noose. And it was just so striking to me. I actually had our driver pull around the corner so I could jump out of the car and get a photograph of this, because it was so powerful that the view of the people was, this blockade, this economic blockade has resulted in the genocide of people. Now, we granted, this is a little bit propaganda, so
I understand. Yeah.
genocide is a heavy word. I wouldn't call it a genocide by any stretch of the imagination, but it has certainly been a hardship.
And I do understand the concept of the noose as far as like a stranglehold on their economy
Right,
and over the course of the
right,
many years, and that
right.
that does make a little sense. But yeah, some of the wording, genocide, for example, especially
It's
speaking to someone
hand
who's
in hand.
Jewish, yeah,
It- yeah.
it's a little touchy.
And the thing is, and one of the reasons I took this photograph is because one of my doctoral dissertations was on uh, blockades, economic blockades, and my thesis was that economic blockades don't work. They don't bring about change. And Cuba is a perfect example. I mean, we've had this blockade since 1959, and has anything changed? No. So, all blockades do is make the people suffer. The governments don't suffer. Governments are still going to thrive, and the people in the governments are still going to thrive. It's the people of a country that suffer. So this was a particular interest to me, based on one of my doctoral dissertations.
It's very provocative, and I do actually like the way. The message may be a little bit inflammatory, but
Sure.
I like the way that they're utilizing the billboard in order to
Yeah.
whether it's propaganda or not. It's an interesting way of getting across the message from a purely public relations standpoint, of
Oh,
course.
absolutely. And they're all over the place. I mean, you'll see them frequently, different ones. This one just happened to really catch my eye because of the grandiose wording and the stylization of what they were trying to say. Understanding what they were trying to get across, but looking at it like, whoa, I think you're being a little outrageous there, in using genocide as a terminology, but
Yeah. I
fascinating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's talk about a couple of other pictures that you have here. By the way, we're going to get into a link to your website as well. I know my students will love to take a look at all the wonderful photography that you do. And I don't even think you may mention you are a cultural photographer.
I am a cultural photographer, and I all of my stuff is for sale. I have sold quite a bit of photographs from all over the world. Um, this one on the left in particular, I've sold a few of. This is Havana Bay. It's just with the fishing boats sitting there. I'm standing on the ocean walk, and it just was captivating and stunning for me. I could have walked for hours had my legs not given out. Yeah,
Sorry.
but yes, I am a cultural photographer, and so I do go all over the world and take photographs of people and places and things, and try and bring culture to and foreign cultures to people that don't get out, that don't get to travel.
And I appreciate that. I know my students do too, because it's one of those things where it gives us a little bit of a sneak preview into what
Mhm.
goes on. You know what actually strikes me about these pictures, and these two specifically, when you look on the one on the left here, and by the way, if you're listening to the podcast right now, you've got to come onto the YouTube in order to be able to see these pictures. They're fantastic. If you look on the one on the left, the ships look like they're a little bit, rusty and worn, whereas the one on the right, which is the cars, they look like they've put money into keeping these cars up to date. And really, it kind of reminds me of when I went to Venice. They have these gondolas that have been there for many, many years, but the families who own these gondolas are constantly lacquering them and making sure they're kept polished and pristine and perfect, because that's their family's livelihood. And I imagine, if I'm a taxi driver or if I own one of these cars, keeping this thing around is such a treasure. You don't want to let it go out of, you don't want to let it go out of,
Out of shape.
in dilapidation in any way. Exactly. So talk to me a little bit about the one picture on the right here.
Okay, great. The picture on the left, the reason, just to mention it with the boats, but yeah,
Yep.
these are utilitarian, so they're fishing boats. They're not there for the picture, so yeah, they're going to look a little bit more haggard. The photograph on the right, yeah, these cars are they've had them since literally since the 50s, and they're prized possessions at this point. They know that it's something that people come to Cuba to see too. So a lot of them are taxi cabs now, but without taxi signs or anything like that. But they're kept up, they're polished. People take pride in their vehicle, and repairing. They're masters at repairing them, and finding repair parts or making the repair parts. It's something you can do with a car of that age that you can't do with the computers on wheels we drive now. So yeah, they're very, very uh proud, I would say, of their cars and of these gorgeous vehicles.
It's the juxtaposition between these two pictures is blinding. It's so good. I love the way these are laid out here. Let's also jump into this next series of photos, which I love. They're so stylistic and they're so editorial. I love them. Talk to me about these two wonderful ladies that are here.
Um, it- the streets of Havana are fantastic. These ladies are just street hawkers. The lady on the right was selling, I want to say they were like roasted nuts in those cones. There are other people. There was a gentleman selling baked goods, and they literally they sing and they hawk their wares, and it just you're stepping back in time. The lady on the left was selling flowers. It is not uncommon to see a woman smoking a Cuban cigar. It's not thought of as, oh my God, a woman smoking a cigar. It's fantastic. And these ladies just they were full of life and full of personality. And I mean, the woman on the left, I said, "Can I take a photograph of you?" And she just gave the look in her eyes, like this little side wink. It just they're phenomenal, just warm and loving people. And, one thing that I want to say is a couple of things, but one thing I want to say is that, a lot of times you will go to a poorer country. And if you ask to take a photograph of someone, which I always do, they might expect a little token of your appreciation for doing so. Not in Cuba. There is no expectation of getting a few coins or a couple of bucks or something like that. It's just done for the love of meeting you. And that's one of the things that I found so beautiful and so endearing. Now, one thing I did want to mention before we go too far is that my wife was really unsure about going, especially this was just to back up for a second, because I think this is an important point. This was right at a time when um, the Cuban embassy, the U.S. consulate in Cuba, where they had all been getting sick
Oh yeah.
and the sound waves or something, and they were coming home. And both my wife and one of our traveling companions were really kind of thinking about canceling the trip. Amy was terrified. Elise was her mother was bugging her to cancel, and I said, I'm going with or without all of you. So when we got there, the first day we walked into one of the squares, and Amy grabbed my arm and said, thank you for making me go. It was just so magnificent and just peaceful. There's no animosity, no problem. It's just a beautiful, peaceful country.
Let me ask you a question about something specific to both you and to I. The LGBT community. When we think in terms of going to a country like this, like I went to Russia recently, and I
Mhm.
know there are some very serious issues there, and we had to keep it on the DL just so nobody would, you know, cause us any consternation.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about what your impressions. Was there a concern about that going to Cuba at all,
Not
or
Cuba.
no?
In fact, two of the cities we went to, both Cienfuegos and Santa Clara, had a rather large gay community. And in Santa Clara, one of the drivers was dropping us off into the city. We were getting ready to go back to Havana, but he was dropping us off into the city to do some last minute things before driving back to Havana. And he said, "Oh, too bad you're not here on a Tuesday night," having no idea anything about us.
Mhm.
Just that we were four women traveling. And he said, oh yeah, so on this night there's this kind of dance at that place. He's pointing out different places and things in the city. And on this night there's this. Oh, and on Thursday night there's it's the LGBT night. And
Mhm.
on Friday night, and
So it wasn't even clicking as an issue there.
it wasn't even a big deal. It was just kind of accepted. It was no big deal. And we saw trans people. We saw gay couples. It just not a big deal, at least
That's
from what I could tell. And now I don't live there, so I couldn't tell you, but from a visitor standpoint, nobody cares.
yeah. And again, if they're just, I'm always wondering if you go to these places and they're just putting on a show for the people or if it's real. But it sounds like for the most part,
It felt genuine because
it felt
the
genuine.
club,
Yeah.
there was an open, well-known gay night at one of the clubs.
Okay. Very
So
cool.
yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Let's also get into one more series of photos that you shared with me too. Now, these are from two different places here. You have this little girl in a box. Tell me a little bit about that one because she's so adorable.
You know, what struck me about this photograph and the story of this photograph, and it kind of tells the story itself, is here is this little girl who has nothing. And what a contrast to what we experience in our country and other Western, like European nations. This little girl's toy was this box of San Pellegrino water. And look at the joy on her face.
Yeah, it's very palatable.
It's her face, the joy just is what captivated me. She's sitting in the San Pellegrino water box and just having the time of her life. She's, talking to passersby and just complete utter joy.
But you know what? I remember when I was in preschool and we had arts and crafts and we would take boxes like that and we would, make like little train cabooses and we'd all have our little ones. And so, I mean, it's, regardless of which culture you're in, whether it's
Yeah,
an American culture or a Spanish or Cuban culture, it
child.
seems like kids are going to be kids and they'll want to do all the fun things that they can figure their imagination to make happen.
Well, and what one of the things that this picture really tells the story is that, as Americans, we've been kind of walled off from what life in Cuba is like. And I know certainly growing up, we were taught, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, more 70s. I was born in the 60s, but we were taught that, oh, Cuba bad, the people are suffering, et cetera, et cetera. And we were really, this was what we were taught. And yet there we are, and nobody's suffering. Yes, it's communist, and I'm not talking about governments or anything like that. All governments have their good parts and their bad parts, but I'm talking about the people. There was joy on their faces, and you can see it in the people.
Now, speaking about the story of a person's face, I take a look at the lady on the right now, which, by the way, there is again, a similarity between these two ladies is that they both have like one's missing a tooth and the other one seems to be missing a few teeth. So, so talk to me though. Yeah, they're both beautiful ladies. So talk to me a little bit about you. You have a story behind the one on the right here.
I do. So this was in Santa Clara, which was really kind of Che Rivera's last stand for Cuba, where they kind of won the revolution.
Mhm.
And a beautiful town. We were in the town square and toured the old opera house and some stuff like that on our own. And sitting in the square, just Amy and I, and this woman is standing there. And I asked her if I could take a photograph of her. And oh, absolutely, obliged, and what have you. And we spoke a little, Spanglish, my semi understandable Spanish, and her semi understandable English. We communicated, and she asked where we were from and why we were there and all these things. And then she walked off, and she comes back with a friend, and she hands me a coin from the 1950s,
Hmm.
Cuba, a Cuban coin, an old
Wow.
coin. And she tells me a little story about it and puts it in my hand and then presses my hand to my heart and tells me that it's been many, many years since she has met an American. And I turned around and I gave her an American coin, and she started to weep. And it was just such a
Oh.
beautiful moment of two people from two different cultures, so close. We're miles from the coast of Cuba. And, she remembers a different time
Oh,
at her age. And it was just so beautiful. The words didn't even have to be spoken, just the interaction between the two of us. And it left such an indelible mark on me. It's just something I'll always remember, that connection, that, for a short period of time, she got to meet some Americans, again.
it's just such a beautiful story. That's just lovely. And I'm sure she really appreciated, the interaction.
She
It
did.
just,
In fact, one of the things she was saying was, she kept talking about John F. Kennedy,
mm,
and it was really interesting. Just the interaction with her, and at my age, understanding who and what she was talking about, and having been a young child, but of course, fresh in our history books by the time we were in school. It was just a wonderful interaction. One of the most beautiful interactions I've ever had.
it seems wonderful. You have such great stories. It seems like you just happen to be at the right place at the right time, whether it's at a cooking extravaganza in Vietnam or if it's meeting warriors in Africa. So, I mean, you have these amazing opportunities, and people really need to go back to some of our previous YouTube vlogs or podcasts and really get the flavor for all the kinds of wonderful things you do. So, again, thank you for sharing this with me.
Well,
Um,
but before we get on to that, there is
yeah,
one other quick story I will tell you. Uh,
please.
one of the things, and this is part of the pros and things to be aware of.
Mhm.
So this fits right in. Um, Cuba is still, because of the embargoes, they have limited, ability for anything. You have to buy Wi-Fi at cafes and what have you. It's very inexpensive. Um, our cell phones worked sometimes, which was interesting. The Most Airbnbs do have Wi-Fi, but again, you can't count on technology when you're there. Excuse me, when you're there. Um, One of the towns we were at, Cienfuegos, when we were there, we had gone for dinner. We were walking back to our Airbnb, and thunderstorm, all the lights in the city went out. That was done for the night. And we got back, we, used our phones with flashlights and got back to our Airbnb. And Amy and I had some Cuban cigars that we had just bought, and a couple bottles of amazing Cuban rum, which is like water there. I mean, it's so inexpensive. It's just criminal. And neither one of us are huge rum fans or smokers, but we sat on the double swing on the porch while there were no lights, and smoked a cigar and drank some rum out of the bottle, and watched the lightning. It was just, I don't know. It was just so quintessential, you know,
Seems magical.
Cuba experience. But so that's one of the things to be aware of, is that you're not going to have solid technology, so be prepared for it to be spotty.
And then, of course, like you were saying before, you were wearing shorts a lot of the time. So the heat is obviously something else you need to be prepared for too.
Yes, you do need to be aware of the heat. In the town of Cienfuegos, we for better or worse, spent Amy and I, while Chris and Elise were on horseback riding to a waterfall. Amy and I decided to compare pina coladas between restaurants. So yeah, that was something that's a pro. I think that's a pro, as well as to be aware of that. Excessive drinking in the heat is going to amplify it, but
Yes.
well
Yes.
worth it. I'm not gonna lie.
Another thing I think that probably is important to be aware of, and it kind of relates to value adds, cost savings, and best practices as well, is it sounds like with a place like Cuba, you can't just randomly go and just on a drop of a dime and just do whatever. It's something you have to plan for in advance. You have to plan for your hotel. You have to plan for your visa. You have to plan for any excursions that you're doing, unless it's like local, just shopping or something like that, even if that's the case.
Well, you have to, there isn't a lot of shopping to do. There are some like little street festivals, not festivals, street markets, I should say,
Yeah.
where you can buy trinkets and all handmade. Nothing comes from China. It's all handmade stuff. And t-shirts and a couple of t-shirts and things. But yeah, you have to plan everything in advance. I mean, we had to have all of our accommodations nailed down prior to going because it needed to be stated for the visa where we were staying, when we were staying there. Now, we didn't have the one thing that did cost a bit more was the transportation because there is no public transportation. You have to hire a car to go from place to place.
Okay.
So that, in being there were four of us and we were splitting it four ways, it was not that expensive. It was, fairly reasonable, but that is your biggest expense is going to be getting from place to place.
Okay. That sounds pretty good. And in terms of booking ahead of time, did you use a travel aggregator site, or did you have to go
No,
specifically through very specific channels in order to
I had
find
to go
stuff?
through specific channels for Cuba because it's, it's so it's limited, but it's also very, kept in a box, I should say. Although I think we did find some of them on Airbnb,
Mhm.
which was good. Uh, but and as far as cost savings go, or sorry, some best practices. As far as best practices go, eat everything.
I can imagine so. Like, what was your
Yeah.
favorite food there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah. Um,
Like, I think of Cuban sandwiches or croquettes or anything like that. I don't know if that's actually
seafood.
Americanized or
The seafood is amazing. Yeah.
okay.
Oh, just incredible. But yes, eat everything.
Okay.
Everything. Oh, and a lot of times the restaurants will have Wi-Fi, so you can always connect to Wi-Fi while eating on your phone or a laptop or something,
Very
and
cool.
it's free. So, but
Oh, well, cool.
that's another little tidbit that people can do.
Can I share your information with my students, by the way?
Absolutely.
Okay. So again, thank you very much, Professor, for all the wonderful information you share with my students. If you'd like to see more of the photography that Morissa does, and again, you are an amazing cultural photographer. Again,
Thank you.
just such incredible work. You can find information on her Facebook page at, I believe it's Pawl-Frederico
Mhm.
photography on Facebook. On the website, it's actually fredericophotography.com, or on Instagram, it's at Frederico Photography as well. Correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Well, Morissa, as always, it is such a pleasure to have an interview with you. You have done such amazing travels. Your stories are amazing. I really appreciate the time and the effort you put into this. I know, especially because of the pandemic, a lot of people are needing that therapy in order to, know about what to do when they finally get back into the ability to travel. So again, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
You're welcome, and it's therapy for me to talk about it. To be honest with you, being locked up and prevented from getting on an airplane.
Well, again, and I hope we get to hear from you again in the future on some of
Yeah,
your amazing travels and adventures that you've done.
absolutely.
Thanks so much. And for my students that are out there, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach me at scott@theprofessortravel.com. If you'd like to know when new videos go up on YouTube, please feel free to click that bell icon right above us in order to be notified about that. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to subscribe. There's no charge for it, and we really appreciate the interaction with our community. And then, of course, if you like this content and you would like to see more of it, please give us a thumbs up as well. Now, if you're on the podcast, again, please feel free to rate us, review us. We always appreciate the feedback. So until next time, my name is Scott. I am the Professor Travel, and make every day a travel adventure. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.